The second the divorce was final, my ex's family rushed 2 moving trucks to claim my mansion. They changed nothing. I owned every wall. The moment they threw open the doors, all 3 of them froze dead in their tracks. David threw the divorce decree in my face outside the courthouse, certain he'd just tossed his wife into the street. He lit a cigarette right there on the courthouse steps, ignoring the no smoking sign bolted to the railing, and blew smoke in my direction like punctuation. "Look at you, Vicky," he said. "Let's see how long that smile lasts. Without me, without a CEO's last name, you think you're keeping that Bel Air mansion?" I said nothing. He didn't know, had never once in 11 years of marriage bothered to know, that I was the one who'd quietly built the fortune he loved to brag about at country club dinners, spreadsheet by spreadsheet, negotiation by negotiation, while he collected the applause. "You're yesterday's news," he sneered, flicking ash toward my shoes. "Keep the house. It's all in my hands anyway." I looked him dead in the eye. "From this minute, our paths diverge. What happens to me is no longer your concern." I got in my waiting Uber. In the side mirror, I watched David kick his own tire on the way to his car, believing completely that he'd won something. He had no idea what was already coming for him. Before the car had even pulled out of the courthouse parking lot, I texted my attorney. "The divorce is official. Initiate Plan B." 5 years of his mother, Brenda, belittling me across every holiday dinner table we'd ever shared. 5 years of his sister, Savannah, quietly lifting cash from my purse with a smile pretty enough that I'd talked myself out of confronting her twice. 5 years of his brother Kyle dragging fresh gambling debts to my doorstep like my bank account existed for the sole purpose of absorbing his losses. 5 years of David nodding along to every one of it, never once stepping in, always finding some version of "that's just how my family is" to excuse behavior he'd never have tolerated from anyone outside of it. Today, I was finally collecting the toll. I need to back up, because the woman David dismissed on those courthouse steps wasn't the woman he thought he'd married 11 years earlier, and I think that gap is the whole point of what happened next. My name is Victoria Peterson, Vicky, to almost everyone, though David only ever used that name when he was trying to make me sound smaller than I was. I'm 42 years old. I hold an MBA from Wharton and spent the first 6 years of our marriage running quiet strategic acquisitions for the biotech holding company David nominally chaired, work that he took full public credit for at every investor dinner, every magazine profile, every award ceremony where his name got called and mine never once did. I structured deal terms late into the night at our kitchen table while David slept upstairs, then watched him present the finished strategy to the board the next morning, as though it had arrived to him in a flash of personal inspiration. David Peterson was, on paper, the visionary CEO everyone believed him to be. In practice, he was a man who signed where I told him to sign and smiled for cameras I'd arranged. I didn't mind that arrangement for longer than I should have, because I genuinely loved the work, and because for the first several years I genuinely loved him too, or at least loved the partnership I thought we were building together. I told myself the credit didn't matter as long as the outcomes did. A rationalization that held up fine right up until the day I understood exactly how much of my own identity I'd quietly folded into someone else's narrative, one deal memo and one boardroom applause line at a time. The cracks started appearing around year 6, not long after David's mother, Brenda, began treating our home as an extension of her own household, showing up unannounced, redecorating rooms without asking, once instructing my own housekeeper to reorganize my closet properly while I was traveling for work. I remember coming home from a 2-week deal negotiation in Singapore to find my entire wardrobe rearranged by color, my grandmother's jewelry box relocated to a different drawer, and Brenda's explanation delivered with the breezy confidence of a woman who genuinely believed she'd done me a favor. I told myself it was nothing. Mothers-in-law can be difficult. That's practically a cultural cliche, and I didn't want to be the wife who made every family gathering into a battlefield over territory. I was wrong about how far it would go, but I didn't understand the full shape of it until much later, standing in my own kitchen one evening, watching my sister-in-law's hand disappear into my purse for the second time that month. 3 years before the divorce, I noticed cash missing from my wallet after a family dinner. Not a huge amount, $60, easy to write off as a miscounting on my part. I told myself it was nothing. I'm careful with money professionally, but I don't always count my own cash the way I count a balance sheet, and I genuinely wanted to believe the simplest explanation available. It happened again 2 months later, and again the month after that, always after Savannah had visited. Always small enough amounts that confronting her would have felt, I told myself, disproportionate and embarrassing for everyone involved. I finally set up a small nanny cam disguised as a phone charger in the kitchen, more out of curiosity than real suspicion, and watched, with a sinking, cold feeling in my stomach, footage of Savannah lifting 2 20s from my bag on the counter while pretending to look for her car keys, glancing over her shoulder twice before she did it, proof, if I'd needed any, that she knew exactly what she was doing. I confronted her privately, gently, showing her nothing, simply asking if she'd taken money from my purse. She laughed it off. "Vicky, that's insane. Why would I need to steal from you?" And I let it go, because David dismissed the entire conversation as typical sibling drama the moment I raised it with him, and I didn't have the appetite that year for a fight I sensed I wouldn't win alone. 18 months before the divorce, Kyle showed up at our door at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday, disheveled, asking to borrow $12,000 to cover what he described as a temporary cash flow issue. David wrote wrote the check without asking me, the way he'd started doing more and more often over the years, treating our joint accounts, which were, in reality, funded almost entirely by the strategic work I did behind the scenes, as though they were simply his to distribute at will. I asked him calmly, over dinner the next night, whether we could discuss large transfers like that together before they happened. "It's my brother, Vicky. Family helps family. You're always so uptight about money." That word, uptight, was one he reached for often in those years, always deployed at exactly the moment I raised a reasonable boundary, always effective at making me feel small enough to drop the subject. I told myself it was nothing, that $12,000 wasn't going to break us financially, and that I was tired, genuinely tired, of being cast as the family's designated killjoy every time I raised a reasonable boundary. I let it go. I wouldn't learn until 8 months later, going through our financial records for an unrelated tax matter, that Kyle's temporary cash flow issue had happened 4 more times since that Tuesday night. A running total, by my careful count, of $47,000. None of it ever repaid, none of it ever mentioned to me again. The clearest warning, the one I still think about most, came 6 months before the divorce, at a family dinner where Brenda, 3 glasses of wine into the evening, told a story to the whole table about how David built this entire empire from nothing, just grit and vision, while I sat 2 seats away, having personally structured the acquisition that had tripled the company's valuation the year before. David nodded along, accepting the praise with the easy, practiced modesty of a man who'd told this exact version of the story so many times he'd apparently started believing it himself. I said nothing that night. I'd learned by then that correcting the family narrative in front of Brenda only ever resulted in a longer, more elaborate version of the same story at the next dinner. But I remember driving home afterward, hands tight on the wheel, David already half asleep in the passenger seat, and finally, fully understanding something I'd been avoiding for years. This family had built an entire mythology around David's greatness, and I had quietly funded every chapter of it, invisible in my own life's biggest achievements. That was the night I called my attorney for the first time. Not about divorce yet, just a quiet, exploratory conversation about how my name actually appeared on our major assets. What I learned in that first call changed everything that came after. My attorney, Arthur Sterling, had practiced family and corporate law for 26 years, the kind of quiet, meticulous practitioner who built cases the way I built acquisitions, methodically, with every document triple-checked before it mattered. Arthur's first review, 6 months before the divorce filing, confirmed something I genuinely never verified myself. The Bel Air mansion had been purchased entirely through a holding entity I controlled, funded by a bonus structure from my own consulting work that had never been commingled with David's salary. My name, and only my name, sat on the grant deed. David had signed the closing paperwork years earlier without reading past the signature line, exactly the way he'd signed everything else in our marriage: the acquisition memos, the board resolutions, the strategic plans I'd stayed up half the night drafting under his letterhead. "This is unusually clean, Victoria," Arthur told me, laying the documents across his conference table. "Most spouses in your position would be fighting over an equitable division. You may not need to fight at all." He also flagged something else during that review: our prenuptial agreement, drafted before the wedding at my own father's insistence, which explicitly protected any assets acquired through my independent professional work, a clause David's own attorney at the time had apparently never fully explained to him. Arthur brought in a forensic accountant, Denise Okafor, CFE, to conduct a full asset trace over the following months. Every major purchase in the house, cross-referenced against payment records, credit card statements, and delivery receipts. Denise's report, delivered 4 months into the process, confirmed what I'd already begun to suspect. Virtually every piece of furniture, every appliance, every art acquisition in that house had been purchased on cards billed to my consulting income, under my name, with receipts I'd unconsciously kept the way I keep every business record. She flagged one exception in her report: a set of golf clubs and a home theater system David had purchased himself, using a separate personal account, items she noted explicitly as his alone to keep. "You've been running 2 separate financial lives without ever realizing it," Denise told me during our final review meeting, sliding the completed report across her desk. "One where you built everything and let someone else take credit for it, and one where you accidentally kept perfect records of exactly how much of it was actually yours." I also spoke, once the divorce filing became official, with a residential security consultant named Frank Bellamy, a licensed contractor who specialized in smart home and biometric installations, about converting the property's access systems before the decree finalized. A purely administrative update, Arthur assured me, well within my rights as sole legal owner during the transition period. Frank walked me through the timeline carefully, explaining that the old system's duplicate keys, including whichever one Brenda had apparently had cut without my knowledge, would become entirely useless the moment his team completed the install, and recommending, almost as an aside, that I document the old lock's serial number before removal in case ownership of the physical hardware ever became a dispute of its own. Quick pause. If you want more stories like this in better quality, my Spotify's linked in the description. I gave David every opportunity, in the months leading up to that courthouse morning, to simply be honest with me about how he saw our future, whether he understood, even a little, what he actually stood to lose. He never did. Every conversation ended the same way, with him assuming completely that the house, the furniture, the life we'd built would simply remain his by default. default, the way most things had for 11 years. I remember one conversation in particular, 3 weeks before the filing, where I asked him directly what he thought would happen to the house if we divorced. "It's mine, Vicky. Everything here is mine. You know that." I didn't correct him that night. I let him keep believing it because Arthur had already told me that clarity, at that stage, would only cost me time I didn't want to spend arguing. The week before the divorce finalized, I had, by Arthur's careful calculation, roughly 72 hours to complete the asset transition before the decree became public record, and David's family had time to react to what they'd inevitably discover. My hands were steady through most of that week, which surprised even me. The same focused, methodical calm I brought to closing a difficult acquisition. What kept me up at 2:47 a.m. 2 nights before the hearing wasn't fear of losing anything. It was the strange, quiet grief of realizing exactly how much of my own life, the art, the furniture, the small daily choices in that house, had been built by me and credited, at every dinner party, to someone else entirely. I sat at the kitchen island that night with a legal pad, listing every single item Denise's report had confirmed as mine, room by room, the way I'd once listed line items on a term sheet, and something in the exercise felt less like inventory and more like finally, formally reclaiming a version of myself I'd let go quiet for over a decade. Frank Bellamy's team installed the biometric panel on the front gate the morning of the courthouse hearing itself, timed precisely so the system would be active before David's family had any reason to suspect a change. Denise's asset inventory was finalized the same week, cross-checked twice against the storage facility contract I'd signed in Pasadena for everything the report confirmed was legally, unambiguously mine. The movers I'd hired worked overnight, 2 shifts, emptying 11 years of a shared life into climate-controlled units under my own name, everything cataloged, photographed, and insured before the sun came up. It was tonight or never, in the sense that mattered most. Once the decree was signed, David's family would have every incentive to move fast, and I needed the transition complete before their trucks ever reached the gate. At 2 o'clock that same afternoon, 2 moving trucks rolled into my gated Bel Air community. Brenda hopped out first, clutching a duplicate key she'd secretly cut years earlier, without my knowledge, barking orders like a general deploying troops. "Back the trucks right up to the gate!" She jammed the key into the lock. It wouldn't turn. "What is wrong with this lock?" Kyle shoved her aside, grabbed the key himself, then froze. The old deadbolt was gone entirely. In its place, a sleek black biometric panel, installed that very morning by Frank's team. "Mom, we have a problem," Kyle said. "Vicky changed the locks." Brenda pounded the panel with both fists. "Open up. This is my son's house." The gate only beeped and stayed shut. She grabbed the iron bars and screamed, rattling them uselessly. Savannah kicked the metal gate with her heel, phone raised, live streaming the entire scene for an audience that would soon include, unbeknownst to her, a documented legal record of trespass. A security patrol from the community's private firm rolled up within minutes, and Kyle, in his frustration, shoved a guard who calmly, professionally, reached for his radio. 10 minutes later, LAPD sirens cut through Brenda's theatrics. Sergeant Diane Miller, 16 years with the department, demanded identification and proof of ownership. Brenda had nothing to offer. Her address, along with Kyle's and Savannah's, remained listed at their shared apartment in the valley, a fact Sergeant Miller confirmed within minutes by radio, reading it back calmly while Brenda's face flushed a deeper shade of red with every syllable. "Divorce assets are a civil matter," Miller told them, her tone even and unhurried. "Until the legal occupant grants permission, you cannot force entry onto this property." That's when my Escalade pulled up. I stepped out in a navy power suit, sunglasses off, a manila folder in hand. "Good afternoon, officers. I'm Victoria Peterson, sole legal owner of this property." Brenda gasped like she'd seen a ghost rise out of her own driveway. I handed Sergeant Miller the grant deed, listing my name alone, alongside the prenuptial agreement and the signed divorce decree Arthur had certified that same morning. "This property has no legal connection to David Peterson or his family," I said. Miller reviewed the documents carefully, page by page, then turned to the Petersons. "She has documentation. You do not. Leave, or you'll be arrested for trespassing." Brenda refused to fold even then. "Fine, keep your house. But my son's belongings are inside. His suits, his electronics. I have a right to collect them." I raised an eyebrow. She wanted to go inside. Perfect. I'd been waiting, quite patiently, for exactly this request. "Officer, to avoid any accusation of theft," I said, "I'll let them enter to collect David's belongings, with you supervising the entire visit." Miller nodded, satisfied with the arrangement. Brenda's eyes lit up, triumphant, certain she'd just won a small but meaningful victory. I opened the smart home app on my phone. The heavy gates swung inward. "After you, Brenda. Look closely. Don't miss a single corner." They pushed past me. Kyle first, then Savannah, then Brenda, scrambling forward like pirates boarding a ship they believed still held treasure. Kyle threw open the massive oak front doors. "We're in, Ma! Movers! Bring the dollies!" Then, his voice died completely. I walked up slowly behind them and stopped in the doorway, arms crossed, watching. 3 frozen statues stood in the foyer. The late afternoon sun poured through floor-to-ceiling windows, lighting up a living room that had once looked, quite literally, like a magazine spread, because it had appeared in one, 2 years earlier, in a feature about David's impeccable taste. It was completely, entirely empty. No Italian leather sectional, no curved television mounted above the fireplace, no hand-knotted Persian rug, no art, no antiques, no imported unsupported tables, just white walls and gleaming, echoing marble floors, reflecting 3 devastated faces. Brenda rubbed her eyes like the afternoon heat had made her hallucinate. "The stuff," she whispered. "Where is everything?" Kyle sprinted into the kitchen. Cabinets slammed open, one after another. "Mom, it's empty! The fridge, the oven, she even took the forks!" Savannah's scream came drifting down from the second floor a moment later. "The bedrooms are empty, not even a hanger left in the closets." I heard her footsteps pounding across the bare hardwood upstairs, opening and slamming door after door, chasing a version of that house that no longer existed anywhere but in the magazine spread from 2 years earlier. Brenda spun toward me, one trembling finger pointed directly at my chest. "You. Where did you hide it all?" I stepped inside, my heels clicking crisply and deliberately against the marble. "Brenda, every single thing that used to be in this house, down to the forks, was purchased with my money. My receipts, verified by a certified fraud examiner. My name on every card statement. It's all sitting, quite safely, in a secure storage facility in Pasadena now, cataloged and insured." Her mouth opened. Nothing came out. "The only things left in this house," I said, "are David's old suits, folded into trash bags by the dumpster out back, exactly where I decided they belonged." Brenda sank slowly onto the cold marble floor, because there was, quite literally, nowhere else left to sit. "You are unbelievable," she breathed. I shrugged, unbothered, watching Sergeant Miller quietly note the time in her incident log a few feet away. "I was just clearing out my life," I said. "David learned about the empty house from Kyle, in a phone call I'm told lasted less than 90 seconds before he hung up on his own brother. He tried, through a different attorney, to challenge the asset division after the fact, claiming the furniture and fixtures constituted marital property, regardless of whose name appeared on the receipts. Arthur's response, Denise's forensic accounting report, 40 pages of documented purchase records, closed that door within a single filing. The judge's ruling, when it came, cited the prenuptial agreement almost word for word, and Arthur told me afterward that opposing counsel had privately conceded, before the hearing even started, that there was nothing left to argue. Brenda and her children were formally warned by the Bel Air community's private security firm after the incident, their names flagged at the gate for any future attempted entry without prior written authorization. As far as I know, none of them have tried again. Savannah's live stream from that afternoon, I later learned, had been quietly deleted within a day, though not before several of her own followers had already screenshotted it, confused about why the caption promised a trashy ex-wife getting exposed, when the video itself showed nothing but 3 grown adults screaming at a locked gate. David's company, the one he'd spent 11 years telling everyone he built alone, struggled visibly within the first year after our divorce, once the strategic decisions I'd quietly made for a decade stopped happening behind the scenes. I heard, secondhand, that 2 major acquisitions fell through under his direct leadership, deals that would have closed cleanly under the structure I'd have built for them. I felt, if I'm honest, less satisfaction about that than I expected to. Mostly I just felt tired, the specific exhaustion of finally setting down a weight I hadn't fully realized I'd been carrying for 11 years. I kept the Bel Air house, empty at first, and furnished it slowly over the following year, choosing every single piece myself, for the first time in over a decade, without a single conversation about whether it fit David's vision for the space. The living room looks nothing like the magazine spread now. Warmer, less curated, full of things I actually chose because I liked them, not because they photographed well for someone else's story. I started my own advisory firm 8 months after the divorce, using my own name on the letterhead for the first time in my professional life, a small thing, maybe, to anyone else. It didn't feel small to me.